Hey everybody and welcome to my breakdown of the final Gear 4th showdown before we hit the next level. Some of my expectations turned out true, but there were some moments that caught me off guard. Despite the issues I have with this episode, I'm so relieved they nailed the most important moment. As I've mentioned in my previous video, this episode is directed by the young Sho Inuzuka, with Toshinori Fukuzawa helping out on the storyboard for the first half. Inuzuka made his debut on episode 1005, but despite that he's still learning and he still has habits I'm not a fan of. So he was a name that made me worry considering the gigantic task he's given. I honestly wish the director of previous episode, Sho Matsui, another young director, handled this episode instead. In my opinion, we could have gotten better results here and obviously on more important content. This is how staff rotation often works. Sometimes luck is involved. Despite how harsh I sound on Inuzuka, I will say what he took is a very big task very few can pull off well, and I'm pleasantly surprised with how he handled the big moments. However, I'm a bit disappointed in Fukuzawa's storyboard, so my expectations were flipped as Inuzuka ends up this episode's hero in contrary to what I expected with Fukuzawa's presence. However, I will say that Fukuzawa handled a poor section to make interesting. For example, as much as I love Snake Man, it's really hard to add good original action to it considering it's mostly just Luffy's arms as he stands in the same position. So results were him punching for long periods of time despite the good animation here and there. And I will also give these animators credit because they did their best to make the repetitive punches look interesting through emphasis on background animation and effects work. I like the first minutes with comedic Raizo moments and CP0 versus Drake. I'm a bit tired of the constant switches to the flower capital with the exact same shamisen playing nearly every episode. There were some very flat angles in the board for the early action, however I do appreciate the little reference to Luffy finishing off Lucci. Despite the underwhelming action, Fukuzawa had some cool ideas like how the hockey sparks serve as a separation line to give us a shot with cool composition like what Oda did on a Shonen Jump cover. Thankfully his board peaks with a moment I was worried how will turn out, Kaido using Future Sight. This is also thanks to Inuzuka's use of colors. I thought it was effective how Kaido turned into a yellow fast line when the episode has limited resources to pull off a full drawn dragon. Doing that, I'm glad there was no CGI here. Speaking of CGI, the episode had quite a bit of it. For Dragon Kaido as I expected, I still think 3D Kaido is terrible considering he was made in a rush back during episode 1004. This is why you'll see how much better Momonosuke's 3D model is in comparison, despite it being basically the same design. CGI Kaido was nowhere near as offensive here as episodes like 1018 or 1050, so I'm glad to say we survived this. Inuzuka takes over storyboarding in the second half and I'm impressed how he nailed the scale of the battle from the get-go. At first I was annoyed at the flashback with Otama, but man, it's actually peak now looking back, because we basically see Luffy's perspective before we see Kaido's perspective. This is a strong point in Inuzuka's board here. He utilizes point of view very well in his half, even during a bit of the action. A cool detail how Kaido's weapon is sliding on the floor before the devastating hit. A part of the storyboard that bothered me here is removing the Gear 2nd stance from Snake Man. In the manga, Luffy uses that stance to hold still to the form, but now we hit the climax. Inuzuka storyboarded it in back and forth fashion before the two combatants get near and we get cool rotation bits, adding so much anticipation. From now on, there's so many dynamic shots, and obviously the highlight of the episode is the amazing point of view Kaido from present to past as he relives the same moment which happened with Oden here in Regret. The tempo of Kaido's attack remains the same, only the timelines and background changes. Just a perfect way to link these two scenes as the intended parallel. My only problem was the perspective of the actual hit. It was too zoomed in contrast to the manga, and it didn't feel too heavy, because in the manga Kaido's whole body is leaning with the attack, which gives it insane force. But now we get to Inuzuka's direction because he nailed these moments with his use of colors and amazing compositing. Also a cool decision to abruptly cut the soundtrack after so much anticipation built up as CP0 interferes. It not only bothers the fighters, but it's intended to bother the viewer who thought this was a climactic moment. The new soundtrack reminds me of Vinland's score. It perfectly captured the tone with the slow motion and Kaido's despair. Now let's talk about the animation. Nightberry returns from last episode to this one to animate more CP0 action, cool depiction of speed for CP0. Toranosuke Hori returns from Zoro vs King, and he starts things off with the Snake Man action. This cut stood out to me from the preview. He did an amazing job and he was pretty ambitious with background animation. He also gave Luffy like 12 packs. Another cool animator who gave us some amazing scenes in the past in episodes like 1017 returns again for cool display of unique timing and background animation. Also amazing impact frame of Kaido. It's by Jordan Weir. It's unknown yet who animated it, but King Cobra had fantastic effects and smears. Iwata pops up again to provide extremely fluid animation from the background work to Kaido's attempt to the burst of cool effects and impact frames. Yu Yoshiyama returns from episode 1065. He's one of the coolest toy animators and he gives us a bit more of his snappy timing and satisfying impact. However, this might be the weakest work I've seen from him yet. And now enters Vincent Chansard with more beyond human contributions on One Piece ever since joining the team for the climax. First it was 1062, 1066, 1067 and now 1069. Despite the little gap, this monster gave us such exceptional quality on a regular basis. Where do you even begin with this scene? The absurd details on Kaido's scales, the character acting, the three-dimensional background work, the volume and consistency in drawings with every frame despite the complexity of the designs, the cool Easter eggs within his impact frames showcasing Luffy's gears including the upcoming one, the sinister facial expressions or the monster silhouette inside of the dragon. The absurdly good effects. What is there in this scene that is not beyond perfect? Absolutely nothing. Vincent Chansard is one of the pillars of Wano's climax. Now finally, I want to give credit to Masayuki Takagi, the animation director of this episode. His corrections were absolutely amazing and he's been working on the series ever since the very early days. I'm glad someone as good as him ended up on the episode. Overall, this episode is in the middle ground for me. Many issues and so much missed potential on some parts, but the peaks are just so overwhelmingly great that it made the experience good. Next episode is the debut of Gear 5 and it will be directed by Yusuke Suzuki. Talked about him in previous video. Preview looks average, but it seems the good stuff will be dedicated to Kaido's dialogue. Also some really detailed art on Dragon Kaido, but there's a break, so it's an extra week to wait. Anyway, thanks for watching, like and subscribe. See you next time.